I was sitting on my living room sofa listening to the water running in the bathroom when my husband's phone lit up on the glass coffee table. A message from an unsaved number flashed across the screen. Last night meant everything to me. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply picked up his phone, unlocked it using the passcode I was never supposed to know, and typed a quick reply. Come over right now. She is gone. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened it expecting to face a random mistress. Instead, I stared right into the eyes of my own sister standing there with designer luggage, while our parents pulled into the driveway holding a bottle of champagne. I instantly wished I had not opened that door, but it became the spark that ignited the greatest reckoning of their lives. My name is Claire. I am 34 years old and I work as a forensic financial auditor. If you have ever had to watch the people who were supposed to love you smile while breaking your heart, hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. You will not believe how quickly their twisted celebration turned into a federal indictment. To understand how my family ended up on my front porch with champagne to celebrate the death of my marriage, you have to understand the man currently washing off his betrayal in my master bathroom. Jason, at 35, was a tech sales director with a smile that could sell ice to a polar bear and an ego the size of Manhattan. When we married 5 years ago, my family thought I had finally done something right. I was always the analytical, quiet daughter who scrutinized spreadsheets, while my younger sister Stella was the radiant, spontaneous golden child who never had to face a single consequence in her entire life. The water shut off upstairs. I heard Jason whistling a pop tune, completely oblivious to the fact that his carefully constructed double life was currently sitting in my hands. The heavy oak front door of our suburban home felt cold against my palm as I waited for the inevitable knock. I had spent my entire career tracking hidden assets, exposing offshore accounts, and dissecting corporate fraud. I looked for patterns. I hunted anomalies. And right now, the pattern of my husband's sudden late-night client dinners and unexplained cash withdrawals made absolute sickening sense. When the doorbell finally chimed, it echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. Jason yelled from upstairs, his voice muffled by the thick bedroom door. "Can you get that, Claire? It is probably just a package." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I braced myself to see a young, naive receptionist or a polished tech executive from Jason's firm. The woman standing on my porch did have perfectly blown-out hair and a smirk that suggested she had just won the lottery. She was dragging two massive designer suitcases up my front steps. It was Stella, my 29-year-old biological sister. She did not look surprised to see me. In fact, her smile widened, flashing the expensive veneers my parents had bought her for her college graduation, a graduation she barely achieved. "Oh good, you are still here," Stella said casually, pushing past me into the foyer as if she owned the place. "I need you to clear out your closet by tonight. Jason said I could have the master suite, but I absolutely refuse to share space with your outdated business suits." I stared at her. My analytical brain, usually so sharp, struggled to process the sheer audacity of the moment. My own sister. The unsaved number on Jason's phone was my sister. Before I could form a response, the sound of tires crunching on gravel drew my attention back to the driveway. A silver luxury SUV, one I recognized, instantly parked right behind Stella's convertible. The doors opened, and my parents, Richard and Catherine, stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. My father was holding a chilled bottle of imported champagne, and my mother was carrying a tray of expensive pastries from a high-end bakery downtown. They walked up the driveway with beaming smiles, chatting animatedly with each other. When my mother saw me standing in the doorway, her smile did not falter. It sharpened into a blade. "Well, do not just stand there blocking the entrance, Claire," Catherine said, brushing past my shoulder to enter my home. "We have a lot of unpacking to do, and you have packing to do. Finally, you are leaving. Jason and Stella are a perfect match, and frankly, we are exhausted from pretending your marriage was ever going to work." I closed the front door slowly. I looked at the three people who shared my blood standing in my foyer, admiring the crown molding and the chandelier I had paid for with my own bonuses. There was no guilt in their eyes. There was only triumph. Are you celebrating my husband cheating on me with my sister? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I was not screaming. I was auditing the situation, gathering data. My father popped the cork on the champagne bottle. The loud pop echoed in the foyer, a grotesque soundtrack to my crumbling life. Do not use such ugly words, Claire Richards said, pouring the sparkling liquid into glasses Stella had happily fetched from my kitchen. It is not cheating when the marriage was a mistake from the start. You are cold, Claire. You are obsessed with numbers and audits. Jason needs warmth. He needs someone vibrant like Stella. Catherine took a sip of her champagne and looked around my living room with an appraising eye. You have always been the extra baggage in this family, Claire. You never fit in. You are just like you were at 19, ruining the mood with your constant serious face. Honestly, we are doing you a favor. Just like that time I had to tear up your university application so Stella would not feel bad about failing her final exams. You always need to learn your place, and your place is out of Stella's way. The sheer cruelty of her words washed over me, but the tears they expected did not come. Instead, my mind went back to every time they had drained my joy to fill Stella's cup. Jason came bounding down the curved staircase, still drying his hair with a towel. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the impromptu family gathering in the foyer. His eyes darted from Stella to my parents, to the champagne, and finally to me. For a fraction of a second, I saw panic. He had not expected them to be here while I was still in the house. He thought I was gone. "Jason, honey!" Stella cooed, running up to him and throwing her arms around his neck, pressing her body against his bare chest. I brought my things. Mom and Dad came to help me redecorate. Jason swallowed hard, trying to regain his typical arrogant swagger. He looked at me, puffing out his chest. "Look, Claire." He started, attempting a tone of false pity. "I was going to tell you tonight. This is not how I wanted it to happen, but it is for the best. You have to admit we have been drifting apart. Stella understands my ambitions." I looked at my husband, the man I had trusted with my life and my finances. I looked at my sister preening like a prize-winning show dog. And I looked at my parents who were actively toasting to my humiliation. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw the champagne glasses. I simply walked over to the hall closet, pulled out my trench coat, and picked up my purse. "You are giving up your home for a man who texts other women while you are paying the mortgage," I said, looking right at Stella. "Have fun with that." As I reached for the doorknob, Jason scoffed, his arrogance fully restored. "You can act tough all you want, Claire, but do not expect to take anything with you. I already moved all the funds from the joint accounts. You do not have a dime, and the credit cards are frozen. Good luck paying for a hotel with your spreadsheets." My father chuckled in agreement. "You should have learned to be a better wife, Claire. Leave your house keys on the table." I pulled my keys from my pocket, dropped them onto the marble console table with a sharp clatter, and stepped out into the cold air. I walked to my car without looking back. I did not shed a single tear as I started the engine. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had left me with nothing. But as I pulled out of the driveway, my mind was already switching into forensic mode. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who dismantles financial empires for a living. The tires of my sedan gripped the asphalt as I merged onto the highway, leaving the affluent bubble of my neighborhood behind. The heater blasted against my frozen hands, but the chill radiating through my chest had nothing to do with the weather. I was methodically sorting through the variables of my newly shattered reality when the Bluetooth display on my dashboard lit up. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before tapping the answer button on my steering wheel. I needed to know their exact strategy. Catherine's voice filled the car cabin, sharp and frantic. "You could not even give us the satisfaction of a proper goodbye, could you? You always have to ruin the mood, Claire, leaving your keys on the table like some dramatic martyr." "You broke into my home to toast to my husband's infidelity," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. "What kind of goodbye were you expecting? A thank you note?" My father's heavy authoritarian voice cut in. He must have snatched the phone from her. "Watch your tone, young lady. Dropping your keys is not enough. I want the deed to that house signed over to Stella by Monday morning. It is the least you can do after dragging Jason down for 5 years. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. The audacity was breathtaking yet entirely predictable. You want me to hand over the house I paid for? You are cheering for her affair. Just like you cheered when you stole my college fund to bail her out of massive credit card debt at 19. Do not bring the past into this, Catherine snapped in the background. Stella needed that money to avoid bankruptcy. You were smart enough to get loans. You are just bitter because you lack your sister's vibrant spirit. You owe your sister, Richard demanded, his voice dropping into that terrifying icy register he used to control the family. You have always been the defective daughter, Claire. Cold, calculating, entirely incapable of making a man happy. Stella deserves that house as a wedding gift for fixing your mistakes. Sign it over, or I will make sure everyone in the city knows how unstable you truly are. I reached out and pressed the end call button. The silence of the car wrapped around me. A lesser woman would have pulled over and wept until she could not breathe, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of my tears, even in private. Crying was a waste of hydration and energy, two things I needed to dismantle them completely. I drove for another 40 minutes, bypassing the upscale hotels downtown. I needed a blind spot, a place where Jason's tracking apps or shared credit card alerts would not ping. I pulled into the cracked parking lot of a cheap, fading motel on the industrial edge of the city. The neon sign buzzed erratically above the office. It was a tactical choice. No one from my family would ever step foot in a place with peeling paint and stained carpets. I paid for 3 nights in cash, ignoring the suspicious look the front desk clerk gave my tailored trench coat. Room 12 smelled of stale smoke and harsh cleaning chemicals. I locked the flimsy door, slid the chain into place, and immediately set up my laptop on the scratched veneer desk. My first priority was securing my capital. Jason thought he was financially savvy because he worked in tech sales, but he possessed the financial literacy of an impulsive teenager. I logged into my primary banking portal, navigating to the joint accounts we maintained for household expenses and shared investments. The screen loaded and a cold smirk touched my lips. The balances stared back at me in bold red numbers. 0, 0, 0. He had drained all 3 joint accounts within the last 2 hours. A total of $80,000 wiped clean. Right on cue, my cell phone chimed with a text message from Jason. I opened it. Good luck surviving on nothing. Cards are frozen. You should have been a better wife. I took a screenshot of the text and saved it to my encrypted cloud drive. Jason assumed those joint accounts were our only assets. He assumed my entire net worth was tied to the debit cards he had just proudly deactivated. He had no idea that a forensic financial auditor never leaves her primary capital exposed to a man who hides his phone face down on the dinner table. As I navigated to my secure individual accounts, hidden under a corporate LLC, a new notification popped up on my phone. A voicemail from Richard. I pressed play, turning the volume up so I could transcribe every word. Claire, it is your father. The recording began, his tone dripping with menace. Listen to me very carefully. You are going to call my lawyer tomorrow at 9 in the morning. You will sign the deed of the house over to Stella. If you refuse, I will personally go to a judge and declare you mentally unstable. I will tell them you abandoned your husband in a manic episode. I have the resources to lock you in a psych ward and take conservatorship over your life. Do not test me. Give your sister the house. I listened to the entire message twice. I did not delete it. I downloaded the audio file, duplicated it, and backed it up on 3 separate secure servers. Extortion, coercion, threats of filing false legal declarations. Richard was handing me the nails for his own coffin. I leaned back in the creaky motel chair, staring at the ceiling. This was not just a messy divorce anymore. This was a coordinated financial assassination attempt by my entire biological family. They genuinely believed I was a weak, defective woman who would crumble under their pressure. They thought they had trapped me in a corner with no money, no home, and no support system. But I was not trapped. I was simply gathering data. They had stolen my past, ruined my marriage, and tried to steal my home. Now I was going to systematically dismantle their future dollar by dollar. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting my cold, tearless eyes, and began to outline my audit. I opened my laptop again, An audit requires a starting point, a thread to pull until the entire sweater unravels. I started with the $80,000 Jason had drained from our joint accounts. Through my secure banking portal, I bypassed the frozen consumer dashboard and accessed the raw transaction logs. He had routed the funds directly into a newly opened high-yield savings account at a rival bank. The secondary name on that account was Stella. They had been planning this extraction for months. The account was opened the exact same week Jason surprised me with an anniversary trip to Napa Valley. He had insisted I leave my work laptop at home to focus on us. While I was wine tasting and thanking him for his romantic gesture, he was setting up the financial infrastructure for his new life with my sister. The frozen credit cards were just the surface layer of their attack. I ran my social security number through a proprietary database I utilized for corporate clients. The screen populated with a rapid cascade of red security alerts. 3 new hard credit inquiries had been made in the last 48 hours. Someone had tried to dramatically increase the spending limit on my primary business card. Someone else had attempted to access the equity line on my suburban house. The digital footprints all led back to my father. Richard had always believed that absolute financial dominance was the ultimate weapon in any conflict. He was systematically trying to suffocate me, cutting off my financial air supply, so I would have no choice but to crawl back on my hands and knees and sign over my home. Richard's voicemail echoed in my mind, replaying with cold clarity. He threatened to declare me unstable. An involuntary psychiatric hold requires a sworn affidavit from family members and a willing physician. My father played golf every Sunday with the chief of psychiatry at a private hospital downtown. This was not an empty threat. It was a calculated legal strategy to seize conservatorship over my life. If they declared me medically unfit, my husband and my parents would have total legal authority to liquidate my forensic accounting firm, seize my client list, and transfer the deed of my house directly to Stella. I felt an icy calm wash over me as their plan materialized on my screen. This was a coordinated financial assassination. They did not just want to discard me for Stella, they wanted to harvest my assets for parts. I needed to ensure my primary capital was entirely untouchable. I logged into my offshore trust. Jason knew nothing about its existence. My parents knew nothing about it. The balance sat comfortably at $4.2 million. I transferred $10,000 into a digital wallet that could not be traced or frozen by any banking institution. I was financially secure, but I needed to maintain the illusion of absolute desperation. If they thought I was starving, they would leave more digital evidence. I paced the stained carpet of the motel room. The walls were thin, and the sound of trucks on the interstate rattled the window. I needed to let them believe their financial freeze was working perfectly. I picked up my phone and drafted a text message to Jason. I crafted the words, carefully injecting just enough panic to feed his ego. How am I supposed to pay for a hotel, Jason? You cannot just take everything we built. Please unlock the visa so I can eat. I stared at the pathetic message. It was perfectly believable for a blindsided, heartbroken wife. I hit send. Less than a minute later, the red receipt appeared at the bottom of the screen. No response followed. He was probably showing the message to Stella right now, both of them laughing at my perceived misery while pouring another glass of my expensive champagne. I tossed the phone onto the faded bedspread. I needed an internal informant. I needed to know exactly how far Richard was willing to push his conservatorship plan before I initiated my counteroffensive. There was only one member of my biological family who had not been standing in my foyer today to celebrate my destruction: my older brother Ethan. Ethan was 31 years old, desperately seeking our parents' approval. He was cowardly compliant and terrified of family conflict, but he was also weak-willed, which meant he could be manipulated if approached correctly. I picked up my phone again and dialed his number. It rang 4 times. I almost hung up, assuming Richard had already issued a family-wide gag order commanding everyone to block my number, but then the line clicked open. I held my breath, waiting for him to speak first. I needed to gauge his level of complicity. Heavy breathing filtered through the receiver, followed by the faint sound of a television playing in the background. Claire Ethan finally whispered, his voice trembling with anxious hesitation. "You should not be calling me. Dad called 10 minutes ago. He told me what happened. He said you had a complete mental breakdown and walked out on Jason. He forbade me from answering if you reached out. And yet you answered." I noted my tone smooth and unbothered. "You always were terrible at following his orders, Ethan. I need a place to stay tonight. Just one night." "I cannot," he stammered, panic rising rapidly in his throat. "I cannot get involved in this mess. You know exactly how Dad gets when someone defies him. He will cut me out of the family business, and my wife will kill me." "I am so sorry, Claire. I really am. But you are completely on your own this time." The call abruptly ended with a sharp click. I slowly lowered the phone, staring at the disconnected screen. I was entirely alone, exactly as Richard orchestrated. But being alone simply meant I had no remaining liabilities to protect when the war began. I tossed my phone onto the desk next to my laptop, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction rather than the despair Ethan likely anticipated. His cowardice was a known variable, a predictable equation I had already factored into my overarching strategy. He had always been terrified of losing his inheritance, bowing to every demand our parents issued, no matter how unreasonable. His refusal to help me was not a loss. It was a confirmation that I could proceed without worrying about friendly fire. I was a solitary operative now, and that made me incredibly dangerous. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen, opening a fresh spreadsheet. If Richard and Catherine thought shutting off a few credit cards would break my spirit, they were about to receive a brutal education in forensic warfare. I began cross-referencing the IP addresses linked to the recent credit inquiries, preparing to build a firewall around my remaining professional assets. 30 minutes passed in near silence, broken only by the hum of the motel refrigerator and the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard. I was deeply immersed in tracking a secondary shell company linked to Jason when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the thin wooden door. My fingers froze over the keys. I had paid in cash. I had used a burner vehicle registration at the front desk. Neither Jason nor my parents possessed the technological capability to track my location this quickly, especially since I had disabled my phone location services the moment I left my driveway. The knock came again, 2 sharp raps followed by a brief pause, then a single decisive strike. It was not the hesitant tap of a motel employee, nor the aggressive pounding of an angry husband. It was a calculated professional demand for entry. I slid quietly out of my chair, moving to the door with practiced silence. I pressed my eye against the scratched peephole. The distorted lens revealed a figure standing under the flickering neon light of the walkway. She wore a tailored crimson blazer over a crisp white blouse, her posture perfectly straight, carrying a thick leather briefcase. It was Naya, Ethan's wife. I unlocked the deadbolt and unhooked the security chain, pulling the door open just enough to confirm it was truly her. Nia stood there, her sharp, intelligent eyes scanning my face. She did not look at me with the pity or the smug superiority that the rest of my family wore like a uniform. She looked at me with the intense, focused energy of a corporate lawyer walking into a high-stakes deposition. "Get inside before someone sees you," I said, pulling the door open wider. Nia stepped into the dingy motel room, her presence instantly elevating the bleak surroundings. She was a brilliant African-American attorney who had spent the last 5 years navigating the suffocating, thinly veiled racism and aggressive elitism of my parents. Richard and Catherine had always treated her with a polite, venomous condescension, smiling at family dinners while constantly attempting to undermine her marriage to Ethan. Naya had never bowed to them. She merely observed collected data and maintained her flawless professional armor. She walked straight past me, setting her heavy leather briefcase onto the faded floral bedspread. With a swift, deliberate motion, she popped the brass clasps and pulled out a massive stack of manila folders, dropping them onto the mattress with a heavy thud. "Ethan told me you called," Nia stated, turning to face me. Her voice was crisp and commanding. "He was shaking like a leaf, terrified that your father would find out he even answered the phone. He actually suggested we turn our phones off for the weekend to maintain plausible deniability." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. And yet, here you are. If Richard finds out you came to see me, he will make Ethan's life a living hell. Let him try, Nia said, her lips curving into a cold, predatory smile. I have spent 5 years sitting at that mahogany dining table, listening to your parents make passive-aggressive comments about my background, my career, and my supposed inability to fit into their precious social circle. I watched them treat you like a defective employee while they treated Stella like royalty. I knew they were toxic, Claire, but what they are trying to do to you right now crosses the line from toxic into criminal. I looked at the stack of folders on the bed. What is all this? Insurance, Nia replied smoothly. I never trusted your father. When Ethan and I moved into the guest house on their estate last year while our condo was being renovated, I noticed Richard was receiving an unusual amount of mail addressed to your husband. Jason does not live there, and Jason certainly does not run his business from Richard's home office. I stepped closer to the bed, my analytical instincts flaring to life. You intercepted their mail. I am a corporate lawyer, Claire Nia said, her eyes gleaming with sharp intelligence. I do not intercept mail. I meticulously review misdelivered documents to ensure absolute legal compliance. When I saw correspondence from a commercial lender bearing your name, I realized they were using the estate address as a blind drop to hide financial transactions from you. My breath caught in my throat. My name was on commercial lending documents. I had not applied for any commercial loans. My business was entirely self-funded, and I specifically maintained zero corporate debt. Nia nodded, seeing the realization hit me. I made copies of everything before putting the originals back on Richard's desk. I have been compiling this dossier for 3 weeks. I was waiting for the right moment to bring it to you, but when Ethan told me Jason had moved Stella into your house today, I knew the detonation sequence had already started. You came here to help me destroy them, I stated, feeling a surge of profound respect for the woman standing in front of me. I came here to ensure they face absolute devastation, Nia corrected, tapping the top folder with her manicured fingernail. Your parents think they are untouchable because they have money and country club memberships. They think they can discard you, bankrupt you, and hand your life over to Stella without any legal repercussions. They underestimated you, Claire. But more importantly, they vastly underestimated me. I walked over to the bed and placed my hand on the thick stack of documents. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the kind of secrets that could dismantle an empire. I had been preparing to fight a defensive war, fighting to protect my hidden assets and secure my professional reputation. But Naya had just handed me the blueprints to launch a lethal offensive strike. Show me what you found, I said, looking up at my sister-in-law. Nia pulled the first folder from the stack and opened it, revealing pages of dense financial data, banking transfer logs, and highly classified loan applications. We are going to need more coffee, she said, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp register. Because Jason and Richard did not just empty your joint accounts, they committed federal bank fraud, and they used your social security number to do it. I took the thick stack of papers from her hands, my pulse hammering against my ribs in a slow, heavy rhythm. I carried the documents to the cheap veneer desk, pushing aside the plastic ice bucket and the motel room phone. I spread the pages out under the flickering fluorescent light, my eyes automatically scanning the headers, the routing numbers, and the notarized stamps. My brain, trained to dissect complex financial crimes for global corporations, immediately recognized the anatomy of a slaughter. It was a commercial loan application from a mid-tier investment bank. The principal amount, printed in bold black ink, was $2 million. The primary collateral listed on the second page was my firm, my forensic auditing agency that I had built from the ground up through 80-hour work weeks and relentless dedication. The applicant listed was me. I traced my index finger over the signature line on the final page. It was my name, but the handwriting was a grotesque forgery. The sharp, aggressive slant of the capital letters belonged entirely to my father, Richard. The heavy, careless pressure on the trailing vowels was unmistakably Jason. They had not even bothered to hire a professional forger. They had simply sat in my father's lavish home office, likely sharing a bottle of expensive scotch, and signed away my entire professional existence. I flipped to the disbursement instructions. The $2 million was scheduled to be wired directly into a newly formed Delaware limited liability company. I looked up at my sister-in-law. "What is this entity?" I asked, my voice dropping into an icy register. Nia pulled a secondary folder from her leather briefcase and laid it neatly over the loan application. "It is a tech startup," she said, her tone dripping with intense disgust. "Specifically, a wellness and lifestyle application designed to curate luxury travel experiences. The sole managing director of this newly minted corporation is your sister Stella. They used your flawless credit score, your social security number, and the pristine financial standing of your auditing firm to secure the capital for her vanity project." I stared at the incorporation documents. Stella possessed the financial literacy of a toddler. She had never written a line of code in her life. The entire startup was a ghost entity, a hollow shell company designed for one specific purpose. They are washing the money. I stated the pieces of the puzzle snapping together with terrifying clarity. Nia nodded, pulling up a chair and sitting across from me. "Exactly." Richard leveraged his relationship with a corrupt loan officer at the bank to bypass the standard know your customer regulations. Jason provided your personal identification documents, which he easily stole from your home safe. The bank approves the $2 million, wires it to Stella's shell company, and then Jason and Richard immediately start funneling that cash through a labyrinth of offshore accounts to buy yachts, real estate, and whatever else they need to maintain their wealthy facade. I leaned over the desk, my eyes scanning the amortization schedule of the loan. My breath caught in my throat as I reached the repayment terms. It was structured with a massive balloon payment due in exactly 90 days. There was absolutely zero intention of repaying the principal. "They are going to default." I whispered, the full, devastating reality of their plan crashing down on me. "They are going to default." Nia confirmed, her dark eyes locking onto mine with absolute severity. "And when they do, the bank will immediately seize the collateral. They will liquidate your auditing firm. But that is only the beginning of the nightmare, Claire. When a $2 million commercial loan defaults this quickly, it automatically triggers a federal review. The bank examiners will find the fraudulent application. They will see your social security number. They will see your business address. They are setting me up to take the fall," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Nia slammed her hand flat against the desk. "They are setting you up to go to federal prison." Richard and Jason structured the digital footprint so perfectly that when the FBI white-collar crime unit inevitably investigates the fraud, all the evidence will point directly to a bitter, unstable wife who embezzled funds to ruin her husband and her family. Richard will produce the fabricated psychiatric evaluation he has been threatening you with. They will claim you had a manic episode, stole the money, and hid it. You will lose your license, your business, your home, and your freedom. Jason and Stella will walk away with millions, playing the tragic victims of your supposed insanity. The silence in the dingy motel room was absolute. The faint rumble of the highway outside faded into nothingness. For 34 years I had endured their emotional neglect. I had swallowed my pride when they treated me like an unwanted burden. I had stayed quiet when they praised Stella for my achievements. I had even prepared myself to walk away from my marriage without a fight when I caught my husband actively celebrating his betrayal with my own flesh and blood. But this crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They did not just want to break my heart. They wanted to bury me alive in a federal penitentiary so they could dance on my grave with my own money. The heavy, suffocating sadness that had been sitting on my chest since I dropped my house keys on the marble console table completely evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifying rage. The kind of rage that does not scream or throw objects. The kind of rage that builds airtight legal traps and watches patiently as the predators walk right into the snare. I looked down at the forged signature, then back up at Nia. She was watching me closely, waiting to see if I would crumble under the weight of the conspiracy. I did not crumble. I felt a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted work laptop, flipping the screen open. The glow of the monitor illuminated the dark motel room. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had treated me like a naive, emotional wife. They had completely forgotten what I do for a living. I am a forensic financial auditor. I said, my voice eerily calm as my fingers hovered over the keyboard. Let us show them how a predator hunts. Nia leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile matching my own. To execute an audit of this magnitude, to meticulously trace $2 million through a labyrinth of offshore shell companies and fraudulent wire transfers, I needed time. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service do not act on mere suspicions. They require an airtight, fully verified paper trail. I had to build a cage so perfectly constructed that Jason and my father would lock themselves inside it without ever realizing they were trapped. But to buy that crucial time, I had to give them exactly what they expected. I had to become the pathetic, heartbroken victim they had always believed me to be. If they sensed even a fraction of my true intentions, my father would accelerate the default on the commercial loan and execute the psychiatric hold before my dossier was complete. I needed them drunk on their own arrogance. Arrogant people get sloppy, and sloppy people leave glaring digital footprints. I kept my phone turned on, refusing to block their numbers. For the next 3 days, my screen lit up constantly, with a barrage of texts and voicemails. I let them all pile up in my inbox, a treasure trove of documented harassment and extortion. My mother sent messages demanding I apologize for walking out and ruining their celebration. My father left voicemails threatening severe legal action. But Stella was the most brazen. Sitting at my desk in my secure downtown office, I watched her public social media accounts with clinical detachment. She was not just sleeping with my husband. She was actively colonizing my entire existence. On Tuesday morning, she posted a photo to her social media feed. It showed her bare legs submerged in the custom freestanding soaking tub I had imported from Italy for my master bathroom. A glass of my expensive vintage champagne rested on the marble ledge. The caption read, "Upgraded my life." She tagged the location as her new forever home, raking in hundreds of likes from my family members. A junior auditor knocked on my glass door asking if I was all right. I quickly minimized the screen, forcing a trembling smile and nodding meekly. I had explicitly instructed my staff to treat me with kid gloves, cultivating an office-wide rumor that I was going through a devastating, emotionally crushing divorce. I needed the narrative of my mental fragility to spread naturally throughout the firm, ensuring that when Jason inevitably showed up, he would find an audience perfectly primed for his theatrical display of dominance. My prediction materialized on Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing a complex ledger of offshore wire transfers when the heavy glass doors of my firm swung open violently. Jason marched into the reception area wearing a bespoke navy suit that he had undoubtedly purchased with the stolen commercial loan funds. He bypassed the security desk completely, his leather shoes clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floors. He wanted an audience, and my open-plan office provided exactly that. Dozens of highly trained financial analysts stopped their work staring as Jason stormed directly toward my glass-enclosed office. He threw the door open so hard it rebounded against the rubber stopper. He slammed a thick manila envelope onto my pristine desk, scattering my carefully organized files. "Sign the damn papers, Claire," he demanded, his voice booming loudly enough to echo across the entire trading floor. "I am tired of waiting for you to accept reality." I immediately shrank back into my ergonomic chair, pulling my knees together and wrapping my arms around myself. It took a monumental amount of willpower to suppress the urge to laugh in his arrogant face. Instead, I widened my eyes, letting my breath hitch in a perfect imitation of a terrified, cornered animal. I forced my hands to tremble visibly as I reached out to touch the edge of the envelope. It was the deed to my house, complete with a neon sticky note indicating exactly where I needed to sign my rights away to my sister. Jason sneered, leaning over my desk to invade my personal space. "Everyone is watching you fail, Claire. Your father is ready to call the hospital right now. Stella is already picking out new furniture for the living room because your taste is utterly depressing. You have absolutely nothing left. Sign the deed over as a wedding gift and maybe your father will show you some mercy." Make this easy on yourself because you are currently looking completely pathetic. I looked past his broad shoulder. My entire team was watching in horrified silence. The decoy was working flawlessly. I let a single carefully orchestrated tear spill over my eyelashes and slide slowly down my cheek. I pulled my hand back from the envelope, shaking my head with exaggerated, frantic energy. I cannot, I whispered, making sure my voice cracked loudly enough for the senior partners standing outside my door to hear clearly. I just need time, Jason. Please. Everything is happening so fast. You took my home. You took my bank accounts. You took my entire family. Just give me a few days to think. I cannot breathe right now. I just need time to think. Jason stood up perfectly straight, his chest expanding with absolute toxic triumph. He looked around the silent office, drinking in the fear and shock on the faces of my colleagues. He felt like an undisputed king standing over a conquered kingdom. He had broken the cold, calculating auditor. He had reduced me to a weeping, stammering mess in front of my own employees. It was the ultimate feast for his fragile, narcissistic ego, and it blinded him entirely to the trap closing around his ankles. "You have until Monday morning, Claire," he stated, adjusting his expensive silk tie with a sickeningly smug expression. "If I do not have this signed deed on my desk by Monday at 9, your father is going to a judge. Enjoy your weekend hiding in whatever cheap motel you crawled into." He turned on his heel and marched out of the office, radiating arrogance with every single step. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him. A deafening silence hung over the auditing floor. Two of my senior analysts rushed toward my office, their faces pale with concern, ready to comfort their shattered boss. But the absolute second the elevator doors closed out in the hallway, taking Jason down to the lobby, my trembling stopped instantly. The fake tear dried on my cheek. I sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back and cracking my knuckles. The terrified, broken wife completely vanished, replaced immediately by the forensic predator. He had just confirmed his exact timeline. I had until Monday to finalize the federal trap. I reached over, grabbed the fraudulent deed he had so generously delivered, and added it to my growing pile of federal evidence. I placed the fraudulent deed into the thick manila folder labeled Federal Evidence, smoothing the edges with deliberate precision. Outside my glass office walls, my senior analysts finally dispersed their faces, still etched with deep concern for their supposedly broken boss. They returned to their terminals, whispering in hushed tones about Jason's brutal display. The theater of my victimhood had played out beautifully. Now it was time to transition from defense to a highly aggressive offense. I locked my office door, drew the automated privacy blinds, and sat back down at my multi-monitor workstation. My father and my husband shared a fatal flaw. They believed arrogance was a substitute for intelligence. Jason thought that publicly humiliating me and stealing my bank accounts would break my spirit. He did not realize that I had spent the last decade hunting men exactly like him. Men who thought they were the smartest people in the room simply because they yelled the loudest. My secondary monitor suddenly chimed with a high-priority security alert. A flashing red banner appeared across the black screen. Unauthorized access detected. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening with a sharp thrill of anticipation. The notification was not a breach of my current systems. It was a triggered alarm from a digital honeypot I had explicitly designed and left unattended for this exact scenario. 2 months ago, long before I caught Stella on my porch, I had noticed Jason lingering too closely around my home office. He was asking subtle, probing questions about my client roster and my firm's data protocols. Knowing his manipulative nature, I anticipated he might eventually try to leverage my professional life against me. So I set a trap. I deliberately left the login credentials for an old decommissioned corporate email account, written on a sticky note tucked inside my desk drawer at home. To a tech sales director like Jason, an unsecured corporate email account looked like the ultimate weapon. To a forensic auditor, it was a perfectly crafted snare. The email account was entirely isolated from my firm's active servers. It was a dummy portal, completely disconnected from any real client data, but heavily monitored by my agency's elite IT security division. Every single keystroke, every login attempt, and every packet of data routed through that specific address was instantly tracked, recorded and archived by a secure offsite server. I watched the terminal in real time as Jason took the bait. He was logging in from the IP address associated with my suburban house, the house he was currently occupying with my sister. The sheer stupidity of using his own home network was almost laughable. He felt so invincible, so completely assured of his dominance, that he did not even bother to use a virtual private network to mask his digital footprint. Lines of code cascaded down my screen as the IT security software captured his activity. Jason was opening the email client and drafting messages to a preloaded list of dummy contacts. I had populated the address book with fake profiles bearing the names of my top corporate clients. I watched as he began to type. His messages were vile, completely unhinged rants designed to obliterate my professional reputation. He sent emails filled with fabricated financial errors, aggressive insults, and confidential project details that he had pieced together from overhearing my phone calls over the years. He was actively trying to sabotage my career, sending these fraudulent messages under my name, intending to trigger a massive corporate scandal that would result in my immediate termination and professional ruin. He thought he was burning my career to the ground. In reality, he was lighting the match for his own federal indictment. Jason did not understand the underlying architecture of corporate data routing. My firm's servers were not located in our home state. They were housed in a secure data center 3 states away. By accessing that server without authorization and transmitting fraudulent communications intended to cause financial harm, Jason was crossing state lines digitally. I opened a new tab on my spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I meticulously logged the incoming data. I captured the MAC address of the device he was using, confirming it was his personal laptop. I logged the precise timestamps down to the millisecond. I documented the exact geographical coordinates of the IP address, tying him directly to the scene of the crime. He was no longer just a cheating husband executing a messy divorce. By intercepting a corporate network to send malicious communications across state lines, Jason had just committed federal wire fraud. Furthermore, his unauthorized access to a protected financial server constituted a direct violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. These were not civil matters. These were severe federal crimes carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences. I took another screenshot of the real-time login data, appending it to the massive digital dossier I was compiling. The file was growing exponentially, transforming from a simple record of stolen funds into a comprehensive roadmap of organized criminal activity. Jason was so blinded by his desire to destroy me that he was eagerly feeding me the exact evidence I needed to lock him away for a decade. My desk phone buzzed. It was a secure internal line from my chief information security officer. "We have a live breach on the decoy server," the security chief reported, his voice crisp and professional. "The intruder is routing through a residential IP. Do you want us to terminate the connection and lock the portal?" "Absolutely not," I replied, my voice cool and detached. "Let him stay logged in. Let him send every single draft he has queued up. Record every packet of data, and forward the complete encryption logs directly to my secure terminal. He is doing exactly what I need him to do." "Understood," the chief replied. "We are logging multiple federal violations here, Claire. This guy is digging his own grave with a backhoe." "I know," I said, a dark smile playing on my lips. "Just keep the cameras rolling." I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, watching the red alerts continue to flash across my monitor. Jason was relentlessly firing off emails, completely consumed by his petty, vindictive rage. He thought he was proving that he held all the power, that he could strip me of my livelihood just as easily as he had stripped me of my marriage. He genuinely believed he was untouchable because he was sitting comfortably in my house, sleeping with my sister, and backed by my father's wealth. But wealth and arrogance offer zero protection against a verified digital audit. Every email he sent was a signed confession. Every unauthorized login was another federal charge added to the list. I was not just building a case anymore. I was engineering an absolute, inescapable catastrophe. I meticulously saved the final batch of timestamps, closing the monitoring window as Jason finally logged out of the decoy server. He had done his part flawlessly. He had given me a beautifully wrapped package of federal offenses, completely unprompted. The sheer volume of evidence he had generated in a single afternoon was staggering. I compiled the security logs, the IP address traces, and the raw text of his fraudulent emails, adding them to my master file. The dossier was expanding rapidly, evolving into a lethal weapon of mathematical precision. I sipped my black coffee, feeling a profound sense of clarity. Jason and my family were operating under the delusion that raw emotion and loud intimidation were the keys to victory. They failed to realize that the most dangerous opponent is the one who remains perfectly quiet while you hand them the exact tools required to destroy you. The digital trap had snapped shut, and Jason had not even felt the teeth sink in. Now it was time for me to prepare for my mother's next move. My phone vibrated against the polished surface of my desk, just as I finalized the encryption on Jason's wire fraud logs. A text message from Catherine flashed across the glowing screen in stark black and white. "Meet me at the espresso bar on 5th and Main in 20 minutes. Do not be late." It was not a request. She wanted a face-to-face meeting in a public space, likely hoping affluent strangers would force me into quiet compliance. She thought she was maneuvering me into a corner. She had no idea she was stepping directly onto a landmine. I retrieved a sleek charcoal blazer. Hidden within the top button was a high-definition micro camera I frequently utilized during hostile corporate audits. I secured the button, verified the recording feed via a secure application on my smartwatch, and slipped the blazer on. Every word Catherine was about to say would be logged and timestamped as federal evidence. I walked out of my office building, my mind perfectly calm and focused. The espresso bar was a favorite haunt for the city's elite, constantly filled with corporate executives and wealthy socialites sipping overpriced lattes. Catherine sat at a secluded corner table near the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a pristine cashmere coat and oversized designer sunglasses that she did not bother to take off. She looked every inch the formidable matriarch she pretended to be. I took the seat directly across from her without saying a word. Catherine did not greet me. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and slid it face down across the table. "Sign the divorce papers and give Stella the deed to the house by tomorrow morning," Catherine commanded in a venomous whisper. "Take this money, buy yourself a bus ticket out of state, and disappear. If you refuse your father, and I will ensure your auditing firm is blacklisted. We will make sure you never work in this city again." I stared at the $100 bill, feeling clinical detachment. Extortion, plain and simple. She was offering me a fraction of my own money to abandon my livelihood under the direct threat of professional sabotage. I placed my index finger on the bill and slowly slid it right back across the table until it touched her cup. "Are you threatening me the same way you threatened my high school principal when Stella was caught cheating on her SATs?" I asked, keeping my voice deadpan and perfectly level. Catherine flinched, her face contorting into an ugly sneer. She lowered her sunglasses to glare at me. "Do not you dare bring up the past, Claire. Your sister was under immense pressure. You were always too selfish to understand the burdens of being the favorite. You owe her this house. You owe this family for tolerating your defective personality for 34 years. You are a failure who could not even keep a man interested." I did not break eye contact. The micro camera hidden in my jacket was actively capturing every micro expression, every malicious glare, and every single whispered threat. "You forced me to hand over the house," I stated calmly, ensuring the audio picked up her coercion. "Just like you forced me to hand over the $50,000 from my inheritance so you could bribe that medical school admissions board after Stella was expelled for academic fraud. You are threatening to destroy my business if I do not surrender my real estate." "It is not a threat. It is a promise," Catherine hissed, taking the bait flawlessly. "Richard has golfed with every corporate board member in this district. He can ruin your agency with one phone call. We will freeze you out of the industry. We will bankrupt you. Sign the house over to Stella, and maybe we will let you keep your little accounting job. Refuse, and we will crush you into dust." I let her words hang in the air, documenting the exact parameters of her extortion scheme. She had explicitly stated the intent to commit financial blackmail to secure real property. "You think you hold all the cards," I said softly. "I know I do," Catherine replied, snatching the crisp $100 bill off the table and stuffing it aggressively back into her designer purse. You have always been terribly weak, Claire. You talk a big game, but when the pressure is applied, you always fold. You have exactly 24 hours to drop the signed deed at my house. If you fail, your father makes the calls. She stood up, smoothing her coat with an air of absolute victory. Do not make this harder than it has to be, she said, turning on her heel and marching out of the coffee shop, her heels clicking aggressively against the floor. I remained seated, staring out the window as Catherine drove away in her luxury SUV. She genuinely believed her aggressive intimidation tactics had broken my spirit and secured a multi-million-dollar property for her golden child, leaving me destitute and utterly destroyed. I tapped the button on my blazer, stopping the recording. I opened the secure application on my phone and watched the file upload directly to my encrypted offshore server. The audio was pristine. The visual confirmation of her identity was undeniable. My family thought they were playing a game of suburban bullying. They did not realize that extortion across state lines, coupled with the threat of economic harm to a federally regulated financial entity, elevated their petty drama into a major federal crime. I had successfully baited my mother into providing a recorded confession to felony blackmail. The dossier was nearly complete. All I needed now was for my father and sister to execute their forged real estate transaction, and the federal trap would snap entirely shut, leaving them with absolutely no way out. I headed back to my office, ready to let my sister-in-law guide them over the final cliff. I quickly returned to my secure office and immediately locked the heavy glass door. The adrenaline from the coffee shop confrontation was fading, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision. Catherine genuinely thought she had delivered a masterclass in intimidation. In reality, her impatience was the exact catalyst I needed. I barely had time to upload the hidden camera footage before my secure phone buzzed. It was Nia. Her voice came through the receiver, sharp and strictly professional. They could not even wait 24 hours, Claire. Jason and Stella are accelerating the timeline. What did they do? I asked, pulling up a blank tracking ledger on my primary monitor. Richard decided your signature was taking too long, Nia explained, disgust evident in her tone. He utilized a corrupt notary public he keeps on retainer. They completely bypassed you. Richard forged your signature on a power of attorney document granting Jason full legal authority to liquidate your real estate assets. I typed the details into the ledger. A forged power of attorney was a massive escalation. It elevated the conspiracy from extortion to title fraud. Have they attempted to transfer the deed yet? Worse, Nia replied. Jason and Stella bypassed a standard listing for immediate liquidity. They used a pocket listing through Richard's broker friends. Within hours, they accepted an offer from an anonymous buyer operating through an offshore holding company. They just authorized a $500,000 cash deposit. I pulled up the real estate database I used for forensic valuations. A pending transaction flag hovered over my house's profile. Jason and Stella were trying to sell my primary residence, unaware the title was locked by a digital freeze I initiated days ago. I needed them to complete the fraudulent transaction on paper to secure the felony charges. They are moving $500,000 across international borders based on a forged legal instrument. I stated the gravity of their crimes, compounding by the minute. If they finalize the escrow paperwork, they are committing grand larceny and international money laundering. Exactly, Nia said, her voice dropping into a lethal conspiratorial whisper. Which is why I just volunteered to handle their closing paperwork. I stopped typing. You offered to be their closing attorney. I played the supportive wife, Nia confirmed. I told Ethan that for a complex transaction with a foreign buyer, they needed a corporate lawyer. I offered to draft the transfer documents and manage the escrow pro bono. Richard was too cheap to hire outside counsel, and Jason was too arrogant to question my motives. They handed me the file 30 minutes ago. A profound sense of awe washed over me. Nia was brilliant. By stepping in as their legal representative, she was not just observing the crime, she was controlling the paper trail. What exactly are you making them sign? I asked. I am drafting specific federal transfer documents, Nia explained smoothly. I am making Jason and Stella sign as the primary beneficiaries on the HUD-1 settlement statement. I am also requiring them to personally sign the federal wire transfer authorizations to route the offshore deposit into their newly created joint account. I am ensuring that their signatures, not just Richard's forged power of attorney, are permanently stamped onto every single piece of federal documentation. They were walking into a legal slaughterhouse. Title fraud is a severe offense, but when you combine it with grand larceny and the illicit transfer of foreign funds, the federal sentencing guidelines skyrocket. Naya was cementing their names into a conspiracy charge that no defense attorney could ever unravel. "When is the signing?" I asked, pulling up my encrypted server to prepare a new directory for the escrow documents. "Tomorrow morning at 10, Nia said. I am having them sign the physical copies in Richard's home office. I will secure the originals, digitize them, and send the encrypted files directly to your secure server. Once they sign those papers and accept that $500,000 wire transfer, they cross the point of no return. The federal paper trail will be locked, sealed, and entirely indestructible. Make sure Stella signs the primary beneficiary line," I instructed, my eyes locked on the glowing monitor. "I want her name permanently attached to the incoming wire transfer. She wanted an upgraded life. Let us make sure the Internal Revenue Service knows exactly how she funded it." "Consider it done," Naya replied. "I will see you on the other side of the slaughter, Claire." The line went dead. I leaned back, staring at the flashing cursor. My family thought they had outsmarted me. They believed forging a single document could strip me of my most valuable asset and leave me destitute. They had no comprehension of the catastrophic legal machinery they were triggering. The next morning, I sat at my desk watching the clock on my monitor tick closer to 10. At precisely 10:15, my secure server chimed. A massive encrypted file dropped into the designated directory. I opened it immediately. Nia had executed the trap flawlessly. Scans of the closing documents filled my screen. There, in stark black ink, were the signatures. Jason boldly signed the wire transfer authorizations. Stella, driven by insatiable greed, signed her name on the primary beneficiary line. Attached was a digital receipt from the escrow company. The $500,000 offshore deposit successfully cleared into their fraudulent joint account. They had actually done it. They had stolen $500,000 using my stolen property as collateral. I downloaded every document verifying the digital signatures and securing the metadata. The evidence was irrefutable. They had committed grand larceny, title fraud, and federal wire fraud in a single morning. The physical house itself no longer mattered. I carefully and methodically archived every single PDF into the Master Federal Evidence Dossier. The sheer magnitude of their arrogant financial crimes was staggering. The trap was now completely, irrevocably fully loaded, and my family had just happily handed me the detonator. With the real estate fraud securely locked in my digital vault, I shifted my focus back to the initial $2 million commercial loan. Jason and Richard had secured that massive influx of capital under the guise of funding Stella's fictitious wellness and lifestyle application. In forensic auditing, sudden infusions of cash are like blood in the water. They attract immediate movement because criminals inevitably burn through stolen funds with breathtaking speed. I opened my proprietary tracking software, linking the data feeds from my decoy email server and the banking alerts I had covertly maintained access to. It took less than 48 hours for Jason to make his next catastrophic move. A massive wire transfer alert flashed across my primary monitor. The notification detailed a withdrawal of $1.5 million originating directly from the newly minted startup corporate account. I initiated a trace protocol, watching the digital currency bounce from the initial holding fund into a secondary LLC registered in the Cayman Islands. It was a classic amateur attempt at layering the second stage of money laundering, where criminals try to distance the funds from their illicit source. But Jason was dealing with a professional who built algorithms specifically to penetrate these shallow offshore veils. Within 20 minutes, I had cracked the secondary shell company. The $1.5 million had not stayed overseas. Jason immediately routed it right back into the domestic banking system, wiring it to a premier maritime brokerage firm located in South Florida. I pulled up the maritime registry and cross-referenced the transaction ID. My sister, the woman who had never worked a legitimate 40-hour week in her entire life, was now the registered owner of a 65-foot luxury yacht. The sheer audacity of the purchase forced a dark, cynical laugh from my throat. Jason and Stella were so intoxicated by their perceived invincibility that they believed they could simply buy a yacht with stolen corporate funds and sail away into the sunset. But my investigation revealed criminality that elevated the scheme from simple embezzlement to aggressive tax evasion. I intercepted the digital invoice and the corresponding tax declarations filed by Jason's newly retained corporate accountant. To avoid paying luxury taxes on the vessel, Jason officially categorized the yacht as a corporate hospitality asset. He filed documentation claiming the boat was the primary operating headquarters for Stella's startup, writing off the entire purchase as a deductible business expense. This was a fatal, irreversible error. The Internal Revenue Service does not look kindly upon individuals who use shell companies to buy luxury boats and then claim them as tax-exempt business infrastructure. By submitting those forms, Jason committed severe tax evasion and filed false federal declarations. He was no longer just defrauding a private commercial bank. He was actively stealing from the federal government. I leaned forward, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard as I built a comprehensive visual map of their laundering scheme. I created a dynamic flowchart on my monitor. The starting point was the forged loan application. Red digital arrows traced the capital as it flowed into Stella's fake wellness corporation. From there, the lines branched out, tracking the $1.5 million wire transfer to the Cayman Islands Shell Company, and then routing it back to the Florida maritime broker. I attached every piece of supporting documentation to the corresponding nodes on my visual map. I linked the wire transfer receipts, the offshore routing numbers, the vessel registration documents bearing Stella's name, and the fraudulent tax exemption forms Jason had submitted. The web of federal crimes was growing so large and so interconnected that it was practically gift-wrapped. They had successfully committed bank fraud, grand larceny, international money laundering, and tax evasion all within the span of a single week. I sat back and stared at the completed diagram. The trap was a masterpiece of forensic engineering. Jason and Stella were currently popping expensive champagne on the deck of a stolen yacht, entirely oblivious to the fact that their vessel was nothing more than a floating piece of federal evidence. They thought they had achieved the ultimate lifestyle upgrade. They believed they had successfully crushed me and seized my assets to fund their lavish existence. My father Richard had orchestrated the initial breach, signing the forged documents that opened the floodgates. Jason had executed the transfers, leaving his digital fingerprints on every single illicit transaction. Stella had eagerly signed her name as the primary beneficiary, binding herself irrevocably to the stolen capital. They were a trinity of greed bound together by their shared contempt for me and their insatiable desire for unearned wealth. I reviewed the amortization schedule for the remaining $500,000 from the commercial loan. Jason was already siphoning it off in smaller increments, funneling cash into high-end jewelry stores, designer boutiques, and luxury car dealerships. He was outfitting Stella in the finest stolen goods money could buy. I logged every swipe, every transaction, and every receipt. I did not intervene. I did not attempt to freeze the accounts or block the purchases. A predator does not snap the trap shut when the mouse is only nibbling at the bait. The predator waits until the mouse is entirely inside the cage. The sheer volume of their illicit spending was working entirely in my favor. Every new designer handbag and every custom piece of diamond jewelry added another layer of irrefutable evidence to my federal dossier. They were building their own prison walls, brick by solid, inescapable brick. I opened my encrypted vault and dragged the completed money laundering flowchart into the master file. The dossier was no longer just a collection of documents. It was a lethal indictment. I watched the loading progress bar hit 100%. Jason thought he left me with nothing. He handed me the absolute power to erase his entire future. I watched the loading progress bar hit 100%. Jason thought he left me with nothing. He handed me the absolute power to erase his entire future. The digital hunt was complete, but raw data alone does not secure a conviction. Data needs a narrative. It requires a meticulous, undeniable presentation that leaves no room for defense attorneys to maneuver. I locked the heavy glass door to my corner office on a Friday evening and did not unlock it again until Monday morning. For 72 straight hours, I fueled my body with black coffee and sheer, unadulterated vengeance. The privacy blinds remained drawn. The ambient noise of the city traffic outside faded into a low, meaningless hum. My entire world shrank to the glowing monitors, illuminating my face in the dark. I began drafting the forensic manifesto. This was not a simple complaint or a tearful plea for justice. It was a comprehensive, devastating dissection of organized corporate and real estate crime. I structured the report exactly as I would for my largest Fortune 500 corporate clients. Chapter 1. Outlined the initial extortion. I transcribed the audio from the coffee shop confrontation word for word, embedding the high-definition still frames captured from my hidden micro camera. Catherine's explicit threat to destroy my professional career if I did not surrender my real estate was documented with exact timestamps and facial recognition markers. Chapter 2. Dissected the title fraud and grand larceny. I included the forged power of attorney, complete with a side-by-side biometric analysis, comparing Richard's aggressive pen strokes against my own legitimate signature. I added Nia's beautifully orchestrated escrow documents highlighting Stella's signature on the primary beneficiary line, and the $500,000 offshore wire transfer receipt that proved international money laundering. Chapter 3. Mapped the federal wire fraud. I provided the complete IT security logs from the decoy email server. Every malicious message Jason drafted his personal IP address and the exact geographical coordinates placing him inside my suburban house were laid out in undeniable black and white. He had illegally accessed a protected commercial server across state lines to commit corporate sabotage. Chapter 4 was the finishing blow: tax evasion and the yacht. I inserted the chaotic, brilliant flowchart tracking the $2 million commercial loan. I highlighted the $1.5 million transfer to the Cayman Islands and its immediate return to the Florida maritime broker. I included the fraudulent tax exemption forms claiming a 65-foot luxury yacht as a corporate operating expense for a wellness application that did not possess a single line of executable code. By Sunday night, my eyes burned and my fingers cramped, but the manifesto was complete. It was exactly 400 pages long, a massive, undeniable monument to their insatiable greed and profound arrogance. I routed the document to my firm's high-capacity commercial printer, the machine whirred to life, spitting out page after page of irrefutable evidence. I stood there watching the paper stack higher and higher in the output tray. Each sheet represented another nail in their collective coffin. I took the printed pages to the binding station. I used heavy jet black covers. I stamped the front with a simple, terrifying title: Forensic Audit of Fraudulent Corporate and Real Estate Transactions. There were no personal names on the cover, just cold clinical business. If I took this massive file to the local police precinct, it would be an absolute disaster. Local detectives are notoriously hesitant to intervene in complex marital disputes. They lack the specialized financial training to understand offshore layering or corporate tax fraud. They would look at the forged deed, look at Jason's status as my husband, and dismiss the entire operation as a messy civil matter. They would tell me to hire a divorce attorney and fight it out in family court. That would give Richard the exact window he needed. He would leverage his country club connections, hire a team of aggressive defense lawyers, and bury the truth under endless, suffocating litigation. I was not looking for a civil settlement. I was not looking for alimony or an apology. I was looking for federal prison sentences. Monday morning arrived. The sun breached the horizon, casting a harsh, unforgiving light over the city skyline. I packed 2 identical heavily bound copies of the 400-page audit into thick cardboard shipping boxes. I included a customized cover letter for each specific agency, summarizing the exact federal statutes violated and providing direct contact information for Nia as the cooperating witness. I walked out of my office building and marched directly to the main postal hub downtown. I bypassed the standard shipping lanes and requested certified priority overnight mail with signature tracking. The destinations were carefully chosen to inflict maximum devastation. The first box was addressed directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. They are the most ruthless financial hunters on the planet. Once they see a fraudulent corporate tax exemption on a luxury yacht purchased with stolen funds, they do not negotiate. They freeze accounts, seize assets, and make immediate arrests. The second box was addressed to the white-collar crime unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The wire fraud across state servers and the forged commercial loan documents fell perfectly under their federal jurisdiction. I handed the boxes to the postal clerk. She weighed them, her eyes widening slightly at the heavy mass of paper. I paid the expedited shipping fees in cash. The clerk handed me the tracking receipts. I folded the small slips of paper and tucked them safely into my wallet. The trap was no longer just set. The trigger had been pulled. The federal machinery was officially in motion. My family had 48 hours before the smartest, most aggressive financial investigators in the country began tearing their perfect fraudulent lives apart piece by piece. Federal investigations do not happen overnight. They operate with agonizing, meticulous patience. For 2 entire months, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division worked entirely in the shadows. I received brief, highly encrypted updates from a federal prosecutor assigned to my case. They had successfully subpoenaed the bank records, quietly frozen the offshore accounts, and placed a discreet, unpublicized lien on the yacht. They were watching Jason and Stella burn through the remaining loan funds, letting the financial rope wrap tighter and tighter around their necks. During this waiting period, my family threw caution completely to the wind. From the safety of my downtown office, I monitored their public implosion. Stella was treating my suburban home like a personal reality show set. She posted daily updates showing off expensive catered dinners, custom renovations to my garden, and champagne toasts on my patio. Jason paraded around the city, buying tailored suits and driving a new sports car he had leased using the fraudulent corporate tax identification number. They thought they had achieved total victory. They mistook the federal silence for my absolute defeat. They genuinely believed I had crawled into a hole to disappear. Then came the ultimate display of their toxic arrogance. It was a Tuesday morning. My receptionist knocked gently on my glass door and handed me a thick, heavy envelope crafted from expensive textured cardstock. The return address was listed as my own suburban home. I sliced the seal open with a silver letter opener. Inside was an invitation to an extravagant engagement and housewarming party. Jason and Stella were officially celebrating their union and their supposed real estate acquisition. They were hosting this lavish event in the very house they had stolen from me, funded by the very bank fraud I had already reported. The invitation itself was not the main event. A smaller, pale pink envelope slipped out and landed on my desk. I recognized the sharp, aggressive cursive instantly. It was from Catherine. My mother could never resist an opportunity to twist the knife. I unfolded the heavy paper. The message was brief, dripping with absolute malice. Come see what a real woman looks like holding your husband in your house. Try not to cry on the marble floors. I read the words 3 times. There was no pain, no residual heartbreak, no sting of rejection. I just felt a profound, chilling sense of awe at her sheer stupidity. She was actively taunting the woman who possessed the power to put her in a federal penitentiary. Catherine wanted me to attend the party so she could parade my failures in front of her country club friends. She wanted to stand in my foyer holding a glass of stolen champagne and watch me break down in tears. She needed an audience for her final glorious victory over the defective daughter. I pulled a sleek black pen from my desk drawer. I took the formal reply card provided in the envelope. I did not check the box for declining with regrets. I checked the box for joyful attendance. On the blank line designated for dietary restrictions, I wrote a single razor-sharp message. Would not miss it for the world. I placed the card in the return envelope and handed it right back to my receptionist to drop in the outgoing mail. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Nia's direct line. She answered on the second ring, her background noise indicating she was reviewing corporate briefs. They are hosting a party, I stated simply, an engagement and housewarming celebration at my property this Saturday night. I paused, letting the strategic value of the event sink in. My mother just sent me a handwritten invitation daring me to show up and cry on my own marble floors. Nia let out a low, dangerous laugh that sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. The timing is absolutely immaculate, Nia said. I spoke with the lead federal prosecutor this morning. They have finished compiling the grand jury indictments. The arrest warrants for Jason, Richard, and Stella are fully authorized and sitting on a federal judge's desk awaiting final signatures. They are going to serve the warrants this weekend. I realized the pieces of the trap clicking together flawlessly. Yes, Nia confirmed. The agents were planning to quietly arrest them on Monday morning, but if they are hosting a massive high-profile gathering filled with all of Richard's wealthy friends and Jason's tech clients, we might be able to convince the task force to adjust their schedule. A coordinated raid during an illicit celebration funded by federal wire fraud is the exact kind of high-impact operation these agencies love to execute. Call the prosecutor, I commanded, my voice cold and resolute. Tell them the targets will all be consolidated at a single location, thoroughly distracted and actively celebrating their financial crimes. Tell them the primary informant will be on site to facilitate entry. Nia agreed immediately. Consider it done. We are going to give them a housewarming party they will remember for the rest of their lives. I hung up the phone and looked back down at Catherine's nasty little note. Try not to cry on the marble floors. They wanted a show. They wanted a dramatic, unforgettable evening to cement their new social standing. I was going to give them a spectacle so spectacular it would make the evening news. I folded the note and placed it carefully into my top desk drawer. The 2-month wait was over. The trap was ready to snap shut, and my family had just provided the perfect venue for their own execution. The morning of the engagement party arrived with a crisp, biting chill in the air. I woke up in my temporary corporate apartment, the city skyline stretching out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Today was not a day for mourning a broken marriage or grieving a fractured family. Today was an execution. I stepped into the glass shower, letting the scalding water wash away any lingering traces of the woman my family thought I was. The compliant, quiet daughter was dead. The heartbroken, discarded wife had never existed. I needed armor. My mother wanted to humiliate me. She expected me to walk through the front doors of my own home wearing a tragic expression and last season's clearance rack clothes, begging for scraps of affection. I refused to give her that satisfaction. I left my building and walked straight to an exclusive appointment-only designer boutique in the financial district. The sales associate offered me a glass of sparkling water, evaluating my casual street clothes with a polite but skeptical eye. I bypassed the evening gowns and pastel cocktail dresses entirely. I walked directly to the tailored suiting section. I selected a bespoke, razor-sharp power suit in deep crimson. It featured structured shoulders, a plunging lapel, and trousers tailored with lethal precision. It was not a garment designed to blend in at a suburban housewarming party. It was a uniform engineered to command absolute authority in a boardroom. The price tag read $10,000. The sales associate held her breath as I pulled a heavy, matte black titanium card from my wallet. It was linked directly to my $4.2 million offshore trust. The machine approved the transaction instantly. Jason and Richard thought they had starved me of capital. They had merely forced me to open my real vault. Armed with my new acquisition, I proceeded to a high-end salon. I did not ask for soft, romantic curls or a subtle, natural glow. I instructed the stylist to pull my dark hair back into a sleek, severe chignon that exposed the sharp angles of my jawline. The makeup artist applied a flawless matte foundation contouring my cheekbones to look like cut glass. She finished the look with a bold, blood-red lipstick that perfectly matched the crimson fabric of my suit. When I stepped out of the salon chair, the transformation was absolute. I looked exactly like what I was, a forensic financial predator stepping into the arena to slaughter her prey. I returned to my apartment to dress. The heavy silk of the crimson suit settled over my shoulders like a mantle of invincibility. I clasped my luxury watch around my wrist, ensuring the micro camera embedded in the lapel button was fully charged and actively transmitting to my secure cloud server. As I adjusted the collar, my encrypted phone buzzed on the marble vanity. The caller ID flashed Nia's secure line. I tapped the speaker button. "The operation is greenlit," Nia announced, her voice crackling with pure, unadulterated adrenaline. "I just received the confirmation signal from the lead federal prosecutor. The task force reviewed the digitized escrow documents I submitted. They ran the routing numbers on the $500,000 offshore deposit and verified the fraudulent signatures on the title transfer. The wire fraud is officially locked." "Are the agents positioned?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly steady as I checked my reflection in the full-length mirror. "They are mobilizing right now," Nia confirmed. "The FBI White-Collar Crime Unit and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division have formed a joint strike force. They have unmarked vans staged 3 blocks away from your property line. They are going to let the party reach peak capacity. They want Richard, Jason, and Stella surrounded by every single wealthy investor and country club socialite they invited. They want maximum public exposure to prevent any political maneuvering or quiet bailouts. They need you to establish a clear line of sight," Nia continued, laying out the tactical parameters. "You enter the house, you draw their attention. Keep Jason and Richard focused entirely on you. The moment you have them concentrated in the main reception area, the strike team will breach the perimeter. You are the bait, Claire. Keep them talking. Let their arrogance hold them in place." "Consider them anchored," I replied smoothly. "My mother explicitly requested a show. I am going to give her a spectacular finale." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my crimson jacket pocket. I looked at my reflection one last time. The woman staring back at me was terrifyingly calm. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. Just the cold mathematical certainty of impending justice. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the apartment. I navigated the elevator down to the private garage, the sharp click of my designer heels echoing against the concrete walls. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, ignoring the dashboard clock. I wanted to arrive exactly 1 hour late. I wanted the champagne flowing. I wanted Jason boasting to his tech clients. I wanted Stella parading around my marble foyer completely drunk on her stolen reality. I merged onto the highway, driving back toward the affluent suburban neighborhood that had once been my prison. The sky overhead was darkening, casting long, dramatic shadows across the manicured lawns and towering oak trees. I turned into my familiar subdivision, my eyes scanning the perimeter. I passed the unmarked black vans parked discreetly near the community clubhouse. The federal agents were waiting silently in the dark. I pulled onto my street, watching the massive line of luxury cars parked along the curb. The entire estate was glowing with warm, festive light. Music thumped faintly through the heavy oak doors. Valets in crisp uniforms were rushing to park the incoming vehicles of the city's financial elite. I handed my keys to a confused-looking valet, smoothing the lapels of my $10,000 crimson suit. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile as I looked up at the towering columns of my own home. The prey was officially in the kill zone. I stepped through the massive double doors of my own home, leaving the crisp night air behind. The transformation of the foyer was instantly offensive. Jason and Stella had spared absolutely no expense with their stolen capital. A towering ice sculpture shaped like a diamond ring dominated the entryway, weeping cold water into a silver basin. White orchids cascaded down the curved banister of the grand staircase. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays loaded with caviar and truffle canapes. The sheer audacious extravagance of it all was staggering. Every floral arrangement, every crystal glass, every drop of expensive liquor had been entirely funded by federal bank fraud. I walked forward, my posture rigid. My crimson suit acted as a beacon in a sea of muted cocktail dresses and conservative black tuxedos. I recognized the faces of the people filling my home. There were Richard's wealthy associates from the country club, men with silver hair and judgmental eyes who had always looked at me like a disappointing investment. There were Jason's high-profile tech clients and venture capitalists, the men he desperately wanted to impress to secure his status in the industry. Local socialites draped in diamonds clustered near the open patio doors. Their laughter rang out over the lively tempo of a hired jazz band playing in the corner. For the first 30 seconds, I was just another guest navigating the crowded floor. Then the collective realization began to ripple through the room. It started near the coat check, a sudden sharp intake of breath from one of Catherine's friends. The whisper traveled faster than the speed of light passing from group to group. Heads turned, conversations halted mid-sentence. The lively jazz band, sensing the abrupt shift in the atmosphere, faltered. The saxophone player missed a beat, and the music slowly ground to an awkward, echoing halt. The silence that fell over the sprawling room was absolute and suffocating. The sea of wealthy elites naturally parted, creating a wide, clear path down the center of my marble foyer. I did not shrink under their collective gaze. I did not lower my eyes. I walked straight down the center of the newly formed aisle, the sharp, deliberate click of my heels ringing out like gunshots in the quiet house. I spotted my mother first. Catherine was standing next to a towering champagne pyramid near the formal dining room. She was wearing a silver evening gown, holding court with a group of local politicians' wives. When her eyes locked onto mine, the smug, superior expression she normally wore completely evaporated. All the color drained from her face. She had orchestrated this moment. She had mailed that venomous invitation, expecting me to arrive looking defeated, tearful, and broken. She wanted a pathetic, weeping daughter she could publicly pity. Instead, I had walked into her party looking like a corporate warlord ready to hostilely take over her entire existence. My gaze shifted from Catherine to the base of the grand staircase. Stella stood there, desperately clutching the arm of a prominent real estate developer. My sister was draped in a custom floor-length white silk gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, all purchased with the cash Jason had illegally siphoned from the commercial loan. For a fraction of a second, Stella looked genuinely intimidated by the sheer authority radiating from my crimson suit. But her lifelong entitlement quickly overrode her hesitation. She lifted her chin, her eyes narrowing into a venomous glare, silently daring me to cause a scene and ruin her perfect stolen reality. I did not break eye contact with my sister. I simply offered her a cold, empty smile. From the far side of the room, near the expansive glass doors leading to the patio, movement caught my eye. Jason had been holding court with a circle of deep-pocketed tech investors loudly boasting about his new real estate acquisitions. When he noticed the sudden silence and the parted crowd, he turned. He saw me standing in the center of the room, commanding the attention of every single person in his carefully curated audience. Jason did not feel fear. He was far too intoxicated by his own arrogance and the perceived invincibility of his stolen wealth. He saw my arrival as the ultimate opportunity to assert his dominance in front of his most important clients. He wanted to prove that he was the undisputed alpha, the man who could ruthlessly discard a wife, keep her house, and publicly break her spirit without breaking a sweat. He set his scotch glass down on a passing waiter's tray and strode aggressively toward the small stage where the jazz band stood frozen. He reached out and snatched the microphone from the heavy metal stand. He tapped the mesh head twice, the sharp thuds echoing loudly through the massive speaker system placed around the perimeter of the room. He walked right to the center of the foyer, positioning himself directly between me and the grand staircase. Jason looked at me, a sickening, predatory smirk spreading across his face. He raised the microphone to his lips, his voice booming through my house, dripping with toxic superiority. "Look who showed up!" Jason announced, his words echoing with theatrical, mocking enthusiasm. "Let us give a round of applause to my ex, who finally learned when to step aside for a better woman." He paused, waiting for the laughter. A few of his more obnoxious tech colleagues chuckled nervously, but the majority of the room remained utterly silent, paralyzed by the sheer brutal cruelty of his statement. Stella beamed from the staircase, her chest puffing out with pride as her stolen fiancé publicly humiliated her sister. Catherine watched from the dining room, her eyes darting nervously around the crowd, trying to gauge the social fallout of Jason's aggressive tactic. Jason spread his arms wide, gesturing around the lavishly decorated foyer. "You really have outdone yourself, Claire. Showing up to our engagement party just to see what a real passionate relationship looks like. I guess you wanted to see how we redecorated the place. Do not worry, we will have a valet bring your car around before you start crying and ruin the marble floors." He stood there, gripping the microphone, radiating absolute confidence. He expected me to shatter. He expected me to turn around and run out the front door, hiding my face in shame, while his investors applauded his ruthless corporate edge. He had no idea that his public arrogance was the final mechanism required to lock the federal trap securely in place. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on his, absorbing every ounce of his public mockery, knowing that the tactical strike teams were currently positioning themselves outside the perimeter walls. I did not retreat. I did not crumble under the weight of his manufactured humiliation. Instead, I shifted my weight and stepped forward. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my heels against the imported Italian marble cut through the heavy silence of the foyer. The crowd of wealthy tech investors and country club elites instinctively parted wider, creating a clear, unobstructed path directly to where Jason stood. He held the microphone with a relaxed grip, his chest puffed out fully, expecting me to detour toward the front door in absolute shame. When my trajectory remained locked directly onto him, his confident smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He glanced toward my father, seeking a cue, but Richard was frozen by the buffet table, his champagne glass suspended halfway to his mouth. I closed the distance between us with measured, predatory grace. The crimson fabric of my suit caught the light of the crystal chandelier, a stark contrast to the sea of muted formal wear surrounding me. I stopped exactly 1 foot in front of my husband. I could smell the expensive cologne he had bought with my stolen capital. Up close, the faint sheen of nervous sweat was visible on his forehead. He opened his mouth, likely to deliver another rehearsed insult for his audience, but I did not give him the opportunity. With a swift, fluid motion, I reached out and ripped the microphone straight from his hand. His fingers slipped against the metal casing, entirely unprepared for the sheer physical force of my action. A sharp burst of audio feedback screeched through the massive speakers lining the room, causing several socialites to wince and cover their ears in surprise. Jason stepped backward, his mouth hanging open in genuine, unadulterated shock. He looked around the room, suddenly hyper-aware that he had completely lost control of his own staged spectacle. Stella abandoned her post on the grand staircase, picking up the heavy skirt of her white silk gown and hurrying down the steps with an expression of rising panic. Catherine stepped away from her circle of politicians, wives, her hands fluttering nervously near her throat. They had anticipated a weeping victim begging for explanations. They had no contingency plan for a woman who forcefully hijacked their audio equipment. I turned my back to Jason, dismissing his existence entirely, and confidently faced the crowd of hundreds of bewildered guests. I held the microphone perfectly steady. When I spoke, I did not yell. I did not let a single tremor of emotion enter my voice. I utilized the exact same cold, authoritative register I used when breaking down massive corporate fraud schemes to federal oversight committees. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly and flawlessly through the cavernous foyer, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. "I want to thank you all for gathering here tonight in my home to celebrate this remarkable occasion. I know Jason and my sister have gone to great lengths to ensure this party reflects their exact standards and values. They have spared absolutely no expense to create an unforgettable experience for their esteemed guests." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room, making direct eye contact with the venture capitalists and prominent real estate developers who had been laughing at his cruel jokes just moments prior. I felt the collective tension in the room spike dramatically. The wealthy elite have a finely tuned sixth sense for impending public scandal, and every instinct they possessed was currently screaming that this was not a standard jealous ex-wife interruption. Several investors were already subtly shifting their weight toward the exits. Stella reached the bottom of the stairs, her face flushed with fury. She opened her mouth to scream for private security, but I raised my free hand, silencing her with a single commanding gesture. Please do not worry. I continued, my tone chillingly calm. I did not come here tonight to object to this beautiful union. I am a forensic financial auditor. I deal in cold facts, raw ledgers, and verified data. Emotional outbursts are completely outside my professional purview. I came here to give a presentation. I reached into the tailored pocket of my crimson blazer and retrieved a small matte black presentation remote. I had covertly linked it to the primary audiovisual receiver in the living room 3 days prior, right before Jason arrogantly changed all the smart home network passwords. Directly behind where Jason stood, a massive digital projector screen had been lowered over the stone fireplace. For the past 2 hours, it had been displaying a continuous looping slideshow of Jason and Stella, posing on the deck of their newly acquired luxury yacht, drinking vintage champagne and kissing against tropical sunsets. I aimed the remote directly at the receiver and firmly pressed the primary action button. The romantic sunset faded into absolute blackness. A collective gasp echoed loudly through the entire room as a harsh, glaring white light flooded the massive screen. The sickening slideshow of stolen luxury was instantly replaced by a highly detailed, professional-grade financial infographic. The title of the slide was printed in massive blood-red typography that dominated the entire room. It read, Jason and Stella Corporate Money Laundering Scheme and Federal Wire Fraud Audit. The sheer bluntness of the title hit the room like a physical shockwave, shattering their constructed illusion of wealth. The graphic below the title was a masterful web of forensic data tracking. It featured high-resolution scans of bank routing numbers, offshore shell company registrations, and clearly forged signature lines connecting my father to the crimes. The official seal of my established auditing firm sat in the bottom right corner, lending an undeniable air of terrifying official legitimacy to the entire presentation. Jason slowly turned around to look at the screen behind him, and I watched the exact moment his arrogant soul permanently abandoned his physical body, leaving nothing but absolute freezing terror. The silence in the grand foyer shattered into a chaotic symphony of gasps, muttered curses, and the sharp clinking of crystal glasses being hastily set down on marble tables. I pressed the button on my remote, advancing to the second slide. A high-resolution scan of a commercial bank loan application filled the massive screen. I pointed the laser indicator directly at the bottom right corner, illuminating a signature that was blown up to 4 feet wide. As you can see on the screen, I announced, my voice echoing with clinical precision. This is a commercial loan document authorizing the disbursement of $2 million. The applicant listed is my forensic accounting firm. However, the signature you are looking at does not belong to me. I clicked to the third slide. A split screen appeared. On the left was my actual legally verified signature from a state-filed tax return. On the right was the aggressive, heavily slanted forgery from the loan document. The visual discrepancy was so glaring that several tech investors standing in the front row actually recoiled, murmuring to each other in sheer disbelief. Slide 4 shows how my father Richard forged a power of attorney. I continued pacing slowly across the marble floor. I clicked the remote again. The screen transitioned to the fraudulent real estate documents. Using a corrupt notary public he kept on retainer, Richard successfully bypassed standard identity verification protocols. He granted Jason full legal authority to liquidate my personal real estate assets, including the very house you are all currently standing in. My father stood completely immobilized by the buffet table. The color had entirely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollow, terrified shell of the commanding patriarch he pretended to be. His wealthy country club friends, men who had trusted him with their own investment portfolios, physically stepped away from him, treating him as if he were suddenly radioactive. I did not give the room a single second to recover. I pressed the button again, bringing up a complex color-coded flowchart mapping the offshore financial routing. Once the forged real estate documents were filed, I narrated, locking eyes with a prominent venture capitalist who had been laughing at Jason's jokes just 5 minutes earlier. A deposit of $500,000 was accepted from an anonymous offshore holding company. The funds were routed directly into a joint account newly opened by Jason and my sister Stella. Stella let out a high, panicked shriek from the base of the grand staircase. She grabbed the banister, her knuckles turning white, her custom white silk gown suddenly looking like a prison uniform. She looked wildly at Jason, demanding he fix the situation, but Jason remained absolutely paralyzed on the stage, staring up at the screen as his entire life burned to ash. Slide 7 is the $2 million federal bank fraud Jason committed, I stated, my tone dropping into an icy, relentless cadence. The screen flashed to the wire transfer logs, highlighting the exact routing numbers and IP addresses. He funneled the stolen commercial loan capital through a Cayman Islands shell company before bringing it right back into the domestic banking system. He used those illicit funds to purchase a 65-foot luxury yacht, registering it under Stella's name to hide the assets. The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. Investors were pulling out their phones, frantically texting their legal teams and compliance officers to immediately sever all professional ties with Jason's tech firm. Socialites were whispering furiously, their eyes darting between the damning federal evidence on the screen and the horrifying reality of the family hosting them. "Turn that off. She's psychotic security," Catherine finally shrieked, breaking out of her paralyzed state near the dining room. She lunged forward, her silver evening gown catching on a chair as she desperately tried to reach the stage. "Do not listen to a word she says. She fabricated all of this because she is a bitter, barren woman who could not satisfy her husband." I stood my ground, watching my mother completely unravel in front of her most prized social circle. Two hired security guards in black suits appeared from the hallway, rushing toward the stage in response to Catherine's frantic commands. They hesitated when they saw the sheer authority in my posture and the undeniable federal documents towering on the screen behind me. "I am the legal owner of this property," I told the guards, my voice cutting sharply through the rising chaos. "If you touch me, I will add assault and battery to the federal indictments currently being finalized against the people who hired you. Stand down." The guards looked at the screen, looked at my customized crimson power suit, and wisely took a massive step backward, folding their hands behind their backs. They were paid $20 an hour to check coats and manage unruly guests. They were not paid to intervene in a high-stakes federal financial crime exposure. Catherine realized the guards were not going to silence me. She turned to Richard, beating her fists against his chest. "Do something, Richard. Turn off the power. Break the projector, she is ruining us." Richard could not move. He simply stared at the floor, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. He knew exactly what the documents on that screen represented. He recognized his own forged signatures and his own corrupted notary stamps. He understood that dragging me out of the room would not erase the digital footprint I had already mapped out for the entire world to see. "There is no need to break the projector, Mother," I said smoothly, clicking to the final slide in my presentation. It was a copy of the official shipping receipt from the Postal Service proving that the entire 400-page forensic manifesto had been delivered via certified overnight mail to the government. "I am already finished. I did not just bring these documents here tonight to entertain your guests. I sent the complete unredacted data logs to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service and the White-Collar Crime Unit of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Jason finally found his voice. It was a weak, trembling whisper that barely carried over the murmurs of the horrified crowd. "You sent it to the feds." "I warned you, Jason," I replied, my eyes locking onto his terrified face. "You wanted my house. You wanted my money. You wanted to play corporate raider. But you forgot that I hunt corporate raiders for a living." The jazz band musicians were quietly packing up their instruments, desperately trying to slip out the side door before they could be associated with the unfolding criminal scandal. The catering staff had completely abandoned the caviar stations. The wealthy elite guests were practically sprinting toward the valet stand, terrified that their mere presence at an event funded by laundered money would trigger an audit of their own portfolios. I stood perfectly still in the center of the emptying foyer, the glowing screen illuminating the wreckage of my family's arrogance. I had delivered the presentation flawlessly. Now it was time for the federal government to deliver the punchline. The heavy oak doors of the mansion did not just open. They were violently kicked inward with a concussive crash that shook the marble floor beneath my feet. The sheer force of the breach sent a decorative ceramic vase crashing from a nearby pedestal, shattering into 1,000 pieces across the entryway. The fleeing socialites and tech investors who had been bottlenecked near the exit suddenly shrieked and scrambled backward, colliding with one another in a desperate bid to get away from the threshold. A dozen federal agents stormed into the grand foyer. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision, completely ignoring the extravagant ice sculpture and the cascading white orchids. They wore dark tactical windbreakers, the bold yellow letters printed across their backs, identifying them instantly to everyone in the room. FBI and IRSCI. The federal government had not just sent a couple of detectives with clipboards. They had deployed a heavily armed joint strike force. Panic erupted with absolute ferocity. Wealthy guests who had spent the last 2 hours sipping stolen vintage champagne now shoved each other out of the way, dropping designer clutch purses and spilling drinks down the fronts of expensive tuxedos. Several of my father's country club friends tried to make a break for the patio doors, only to find 3 more federal agents stepping through the glass thresholds, effectively sealing every single exit in the estate. The mansion was completely locked down. Nobody moves. A booming voice echoed through the massive room. The lead agent. A tall, imposing man with graying temples and a badge clipped to his belt stepped into the center of the foyer. He raised his hand, gesturing for his tactical team to secure the perimeter. The agents moved swiftly, taking up positions at the front doors, the staircase, and the kitchen entrance. The hired valets and catering staff immediately backed against the walls, raising their hands in clear surrender. The lead agent swept his piercing gaze across the room, taking in the massive projector screen, still displaying the intricate money laundering flowchart. He looked at the forged signatures, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of federal wire fraud glowing in bright, unmistakable colors. A faint, almost imperceptible nod of approval crossed his face. He then turned his attention directly to the stage where Jason stood, completely paralyzed. Jason looked like a man who had just stepped on a live landmine. The arrogant tech sales director who had confidently snatched a microphone to humiliate his wife was entirely gone. His jaw trembled and the microphone slipped from his slick, sweating fingers, hitting the floor with a sharp, whining thud. Stella, trapped halfway down the grand staircase, let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. She frantically tried to gather the heavy silk skirt of her custom gown, turning to run back up to the second floor. A female FBI agent immediately stepped onto the landing, blocking her path with a rigid arm. "Sit down on the steps and keep your hands where I can see them," the agent commanded, her voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Stella collapsed onto the stairs, burying her face in her hands, her diamond bracelets clinking loudly against the wooden banister. Catherine and Richard were backed against the formal dining table. My father clutched his chest, his breathing rapid and shallow, his eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for a loophole that simply did not exist. My mother gripped his arm, her silver evening gown trembling as she finally processed the sheer magnitude of their destruction. This was not a social embarrassment they could smooth over with a charitable donation. This was a federal raid broadcast live to their entire elite social circle. The lead agent pulled a thick stack of warrants from his jacket pocket. "We have federal arrest warrants for Jason, Richard, and Stella," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly over the whimpering guests. "We also have warrants to search these premises and seize any assets purchased with funds related to the commercial loan fraud and offshore wire transfers detailed in the federal complaint." Before the lead agent could signal his team to move in, a figure detached herself from the cluster of terrified guests huddled near the coat check. It was Nia. She walked forward with the same crisp, commanding posture she used in corporate boardrooms. She was dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, completely unbothered by the tactical agents swarming the property. She bypassed my cowering parents and walked straight up to the lead agent. She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a heavily sealed manila dossier. "Agent Stone," Nia said, handing the thick file directly to him. I am the cooperating witness referenced in the primary affidavit. Inside this dossier, you will find the original physical copies of the fraudulent escrow documents, complete with the wet ink signatures of both Jason and Stella. You will also find the notarized transfer deeds that Richard explicitly forged. The ink analysis matches the digital files we submitted 48 hours ago. The lead agent took the dossier, inspecting the unbroken seal. Excellent work, counselor. This matches the federal ledger perfectly. The digital trails gave us the probable cause, but these wet ink originals will guarantee the conviction. From the far side of the room near the kitchen swinging doors, a voice cracked with utter betrayal and disbelief. "Nia, what are you doing?" Ethan screamed, pushing his way past a group of terrified catering staff. My older brother looked absolutely frantic, his eyes wide with horror as he stared at his wife standing casually next to a federal investigator. "You are helping them. You are giving the FBI documents to arrest my family. We are supposed to protect each other. You are my wife. What is wrong with you?" Nia did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. She turned slowly to face the cowardly man she had married. She looked at Ethan, a man who had stood by and watched his parents emotionally abuse his sister for 3 decades. A man who had explicitly refused to help me when I begged for a place to stay, terrified of losing his precious inheritance. Nia looked at her cowardly husband, her expression radiating absolute chilling professional detachment. "My job," Nia stated firmly, her voice carrying a lethal finality. "I am a corporate lawyer, Ethan. I do not protect federal criminals. I protect the law. And your family just broke every single statute in the federal code." Ethan recoiled, as if she had physically struck him. He looked at my parents, then at Jason, and finally at me, realizing that his entire world, his safety net, and his future inheritance had just been entirely dismantled by the 2 women his family had consistently underestimated. He slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor completely broken. I stood my ground in my crimson suit, watching the synchronized machinery of federal justice prepare to strike. The preparation was over. The trap had been successfully sprung. The evidence was secured in the hands of the lead investigator. The absolute destruction of my toxic family was no longer a theoretical plan displayed on a projector screen. It was a tangible, unavoidable reality unfolding in real time, right in my foyer. The lead agent handed the sealed dossier to a junior officer for processing. He turned back to the room, unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt, and looked directly at Jason. The presentation was officially over. Now it was time for the arrests. The sharp clink of the heavy steel handcuffs unlocking seemed to break the spell paralyzing the room. Jason's eyes darted wildly across the foyer, frantically seeking an escape route. Pure animalistic panic completely overrode his arrogant facade. He lunged abruptly to his right, violently shoving past a horrified tech investor, and sprinted blindly toward the glass patio doors. It was a pathetic, utterly futile attempt. He did not even make it 10 feet. A burly FBI agent intercepted his path with brutal tactical efficiency. The agent lowered his shoulder and tackled Jason directly onto a massive circular catering table. The impact was spectacular, playing out like a slow-motion cinematic sequence. The reinforced wooden table buckled and collapsed instantly under their combined weight. Hundreds of crystal champagne flutes and silver platters shattered into a magnificent glittering explosion of broken glass and ruined caviar. Jason groaned loudly, pinned flat against the debris-covered marble floor, his expensive bespoke suit drenched in spilled wine. The agent forcefully yanked his arms behind his back. The cold steel cuffs snapped shut around his wrists with a definitive ringing click that signaled the absolute end of his freedom. At the base of the grand staircase, Stella watched her stolen future disintegrate before her eyes. A female IRS agent grabbed her arms, spinning her around roughly to face the wooden banister. Stella shrieked hysterically, thrashing and kicking her designer heels as the agent forcefully pinned her wrists together. The heavy metal handcuffs violently snagged the delicate fabric of her custom white silk gown, tearing a massive, jagged rip straight down the expensive bodice. The pristine $15,000 dress was instantly ruined, transforming into a torn, dirty rag as she was marched aggressively toward the front doors, weeping uncontrollably. Near the formal dining room, my father decided to play his final desperate card. Richard suddenly gasped loudly, clutching his chest theatrically and sinking heavily to his knees. He wailed that his heart was failing, demanding an immediate ambulance and a hospital transfer to delay his impending arrest. The lead agent rolled his eyes, clearly accustomed to white-collar criminals faking medical emergencies, and signaled the tactical medical team stationed outside. Two paramedics entered briskly with a portable electrocardiogram machine. They hooked my father up right there on the dining room floor. Less than 2 minutes later, the lead paramedic stood up and looked directly at the federal agents. His heart rhythm is perfectly normal. He is completely faking it. The agents hauled Richard to his feet without a single ounce of sympathy, walking the once powerful, arrogant patriarch out of the house in front of his thoroughly disgusted country club peers. Catherine was left standing completely alone amidst the absolute wreckage of her social empire. She watched her husband, her golden child, and her prospective son-in-law being dragged away in chains like common street criminals. Panic consumed her. She spun around and scrambled toward me, her hands clasped together in desperate, frantic prayer. "Claire, please," she begged, thick black tears of mascara ruining her immaculate makeup. "Tell them to stop. Tell them it was all a terrible misunderstanding. You have the power to fix this. Call them off right now." I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life trying to break my spirit and diminish my worth. I took a step forward, leaning in close, ensuring my voice reached only her ears. "I told you I was a forensic auditor," I whispered, my tone dripping with absolute freezing finality. "You should have respected my career." 6 months later, the opulent crystal chandeliers and shattered champagne flutes of my former foyer had been replaced by the blinding, sterile fluorescent lights of a federal correctional facility. I sat in a rigid plastic chair inside a stark, soundproof visitation room. A thick panel of bulletproof glass separated me from the inmate area. I wore my tailored crimson blazer, a deliberate reminder of the night their empire fell. The heavy steel door on the opposite side of the glass clanked open. Catherine shuffled into the viewing booth. The transformation was staggering. The formidable, perfectly manicured matriarch who had terrorized me for 3 decades was completely gone. In her place sat a frail, aged woman drowning in a bleak, oversized orange jumpsuit. Her designer blonde highlights had grown out into a harsh, uneven gray. Without her expensive foundation and tailored silks, she looked small, hollowed out, and entirely stripped of her toxic arrogance. She sank heavily into the plastic chair and picked up the black telephone receiver with trembling, unmanicured hands. I picked up my receiver, holding it to my ear. I did not speak first. I simply let the silence stretch, forcing her to initiate the conversation. "Claire." Catherine sobbed, her voice cracking through the static of the prison phone line. "Thank God you came. You have to help us. The federal defenders are completely useless and the private attorneys are demanding retainers we cannot pay. The government seized everything. The accounts, the cars, the estate. Your father is struggling in the men's facility. Stella is facing trial next month. Please, you have the money now. You have to pay our legal fees. We are your family." The word hung in the sterile air between us. Family. She wielded it like a weapon for 34 years, using it to demand my compliance, my money, and my silent suffering. Now she was using it as a desperate shield to avoid the consequences of her own felony convictions. I looked at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just the cold mechanical detachment of an auditor closing out a finalized ledger. "You said I was a failure because I could not keep a man." I stated, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "Jason is looking at 15 years in federal lockup, and Stella's yacht was just seized by the IRS. I leaned slightly closer to the glass, making sure my eyes locked directly onto hers. "Enjoy the perfect life you built." Catherine opened her mouth to scream, her face contorting in absolute helpless panic. I did not stay to listen. I placed the receiver gently back onto the cradle, severing the connection. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my crimson suit, and walked out of the visitation room completely indifferent to the woman sobbing behind the glass. I did not look back. The incredibly heavy steel door of the bleak visitation room clicking shut behind me was the final sound my past ever made. From that specific moment forward, the massive federal justice system operated exactly as it was perfectly designed to. Jason's trial did not even make it to a jury. Faced with the overwhelming mountain of digital evidence, the forged wire transfers, and the offshore routing logs I had meticulously compiled, his high-priced defense attorneys immediately advised him to take a swift plea deal. He surrendered his remaining assets, liquidated his tech sales portfolio to pay federal fines, and filed for absolute bankruptcy. The judge sentenced him to a mandatory 15 years in a high-security federal penitentiary without the slightest possibility of early parole. The man who had sneered at me in my own foyer, bragging about his invincible wealth and his brand-new reality, was now assigned a designated bunk and an inmate number. He would spend the next decade and a half folding identical gray uniforms in the prison laundry room, earning 12 cents an hour. Stella faced a similar devastation. Her stolen 65-foot luxury yacht was auctioned off by the federal government to recover the stolen loan capital. The sham wellness corporation was dissolved by federal mandate. Without Jason's stolen money or my parents' fraudulent financial backing, she was left with a felony conviction for grand larceny and an insurmountable mountain of legal debt. The glamorous, upgraded life she had bragged about on social media evaporated into nothingness, leaving her with a permanent criminal record that would follow her for the rest of her natural life. As for my older brother Ethan, his cowardice ultimately cost him the one genuinely good thing he had ever managed to secure in his life. Nia did not hesitate. The morning after the federal raid on my house, she filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences and his complicity in a criminal family enterprise. Ethan, terrified of facing any legal scrutiny himself, did not even attempt to fight her in court. Nia was granted full uncontested custody of their children. She packed up her life, left the suffocating proximity of my parents' ruined estate, and moved forward with the ruthless grace I had always admired in her. I did not just admire Nia, I hired her. When I relocated my headquarters, I needed someone whose legal brilliance matched my forensic aggression. Nia officially accepted the position of chief legal counsel at my newly expanded forensic accounting firm. Together, we built an absolute powerhouse of an agency. We specialized in tracking high-level corporate embezzlement, dismantling fraudulent shell companies, and hunting down the exact type of arrogant financial predators my family had tried to be. Our client roster tripled within the first quarter. We commanded premium retainers operating out of a sleek, ultra-modern office building that took up an entire commercial floor in the financial district. We were two women who had looked toxic manipulation dead in the eye and completely dismantled it from the inside out. A year and a half after that explosive engagement party, I stepped out onto the expansive glass balcony of my new penthouse in New York City. The morning air was crisp and electric, vibrating with the endless, pulsing energy of the city below. I walked to the edge of the terrace, resting my hands on the cool metal railing. The skyline stretched out endlessly before me, a magnificent horizon of steel glass and limitless possibility. To arrive at this exact location in my life required letting go of every single illusion I had ever harbored about unconditional love. I raised a small porcelain cup of freshly brewed espresso to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The rich, dark flavor grounded me in the present reality. There were no more manipulative phone calls to screen. There were no more passive-aggressive holiday dinners to endure. There were no more demands to shrink myself down to make room for a golden child sister or a narcissistic husband. The crushing, suffocating dead weight of my biological family had been completely surgically severed from my existence. They were nothing more than closed files in a filing cabinet gathering dust. I had not just survived their coordinated financial assassination, I had used their own weapons to build an impenetrable fortress for myself. My home was truly my own. My wealth was legally secured and entirely untouchable. My career was thriving at an unprecedented level. The quiet, compliant daughter they thought they could easily discard had proven to be the architect of their absolute destruction. It was a brutal reckoning that completely reset the trajectory of my professional and personal world. Sometimes achieving complete harmony requires walking through an absolute inferno of betrayal first. I looked down at the bustling streets of Manhattan, watching the tiny cars navigate the complex grid of the city avenues. I smiled, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of peace settle permanently into my bones. The game they tried to force me to play had always been rigged against me, but I had rewritten the rules entirely. They gambled everything they owned on the assumption that I was too weak to fight back. They lost. To anyone out there who has been told they are not enough by the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally, hear this. Your value is not determined by their inability to see it. You owe no loyalty to those who exploit you. You owe it to yourself to walk away. I learned that lesson the hard way, but permanently. Now it is your turn to hold the heavy pen. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Sometimes the only way to win a rigged game is to burn the casino to the ground. Have you ever had to let a toxic person dig their own grave? Tell me your story in the comments and do not forget to like and subscribe. Society consistently conditions us to believe that biological family is an unbreakable bond, a guaranteed sanctuary of unconditional love and lifelong support. However, the harrowing journey of dismantling a deeply toxic family dynamic reveals a much colder reality. Blood merely makes people related, but it is loyalty, profound respect, and mutual care that truly forge a family. The most vital lesson to extract from this ordeal is that your inherent worth is never defined by those who are fundamentally incapable of valuing you. When individuals use familial ties as a weapon for financial exploitation or a convenient shield to avoid accountability, the concept of family devolves into a gilded cage. Toxic relatives often thrive on the assumption that their targets are too compassionate, too conditioned, or too weak to retaliate. They drain your resources and your joy to mask their own deep-seated inadequacies. Tolerating this continuous abuse under the guise of keeping the peace only empowers the abusers and systematically destroys the victim's self-esteem. Surviving this kind of emotional and financial assassination requires more than just passive resilience. It demands the absolute courage to walk away and completely burn the bridge behind you. By actively stepping out of the assigned role of the scapegoat and refusing to internalize their cruel, fabricated narratives, you reclaim your ultimate power. True liberation is found when you realize that playing a rigged game will only ever result in a loss. Healing officially begins the exact moment you stop setting yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. Building a spectacular, unapologetically authentic life on your own terms is the purest form of justice. Evaluate the boundaries in your own life today and find the courage to permanently walk away from anyone who drains your peace to fuel their pride.